please, we have plenty of food and coffee and drink, so help yourself during the presentation too. But I'd like to welcome everybody this morning. My name is Derek Kewer. I'm the Executive Director for Wceda, Walworth County Economic Development Alliance, and we'd first just like to thank our sponsors. And so Gateway Technical College has been very gracious in letting us host events here. It's been a great partnership. We want to thank them. Ideal Impressions always does a great job with our photography and video. It's great. We get lots of hits after the fact for people that aren't able to attend events, so we really appreciate that. Grand Geneva had helped with the lodging for our guests. And then Voyager Capital Management, Bob Anderson is sponsoring the event here. And I'd like to ask Bob to come up and just give a brief introduction of the speaker. Thank you, Bob.
All right, thanks, sir. Sure. Okay, today's presenter is Dr. Chris Kuehl. He's an economist, you know, everybody knows what that is, right? Chris is the managing director of the Armada Intelligence, combining traditions of corporate and competitive intelligence with strategic and tactical planning to provide clients with a clear view of the world they exist in and what they can do to advance their goals. Chris delivers over 150 presentations per year to groups ranging from the Chambers of Commerce to U.S. military advisors. Not to mention, he has several large U.S. corporations and organizations as clients. Chris serves as an economic analyst for the Fabricators and Manufacturing Association and is the economist for at least 5 state CPA societies. As the editor and publisher, he publishes e-publications including the Business Intelligence Brief, Executive Intelligence Briefing, and the Black Owl Report. Maybe some additional ones as well he can talk to you about. Chris holds a PhD in political economics. He has a master in East Asian Studies and a master's in Soviet and East European Studies, and was a professor of international economics and finance for 15 years prior to starting Armada. I personally enjoyed Chris's insights on the economy, politics, some good discussions, email going back and forth occasionally, and most of all his humor, such as the tale of men shopping on Christmas Eve. Maybe share that one with us. So without further ado, everyone, Dr. Chris Kuehl.
Thank you. So after an intro like that, it usually means that I have trouble holding a job. So I try to get people to use the best intro I ever got, which was in Atlanta in front of 800 people, and this woman got up and said, "We found this guy in the lobby and his badge said speaker," so we thought, what the hell? It's always good as an economist to lower expectations, particularly when you find out that I'm an economist that speaks to accountants. You can just feel the excitement in the room. It's like, oh boy, because now it's up to 8 state accounting societies, so I speak to a lot of accountants. So you're having a little bit of a treat today. Economists are not normally allowed to speak without charts and graphs, but I'm not showing any. You know, it's way too early in the morning for that, and one of the things that I've noted over the years is that if you have a slideshow, people are polite, and they want you to finish it. And they won't ask another question until you're done. And then I'm done, and there's no more time. So to heck with this, you can ask questions at any point. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy, kind of related to what's happening regionally, and at that point, it's kind of up to you to take me off on the appropriate tangents, because I don't know what you're interested in, and you need to tell me. So, to begin with, we're really kind of dealing this year with things that started last year. So, a lot of what we're contending with from an economic perspective really got underway in 2016. Most notably, things like interest rates. The Fed began to raise interest rates last year, and the Fed's been very explicit for the last several years about what they want. They're not sort of in the, remember Alan Greenspan? I mean, Greenspan was the Sphinx. Nobody had a clue what he was looking at, considering, thinking about. Remember Squawk Box used to try to measure the size of his briefcase to figure out what his next step was going to be? Well, now you've got the Ben Bernanke tradition. He was an academic and wanted to share lots of information. I remember him trying to educate Congress. That didn't last long. But Yellen is in the same mold, you know, so a lot of communication, a lot of conversation about what it is they're looking for. And the top three things from the Fed's perspective was the stable job market. They wanted to see unemployment rates at least towards the traditional lows. They wanted to see inflation close to around 2%. So at that juncture, it's more of a stimulus to the economy than it is a negative. It gets close to 3, 3.5, 4, that is worrisome, and the Fed will take steps. But there's no real sign of that, at least in the immediate future. And then the third thing the Fed is looking for was evidence that the economy didn't really need any more of that kind of stimulus. And right now, even the doves within the context of the Fed have indicated that we don't need any more of that kind of stimulus. We have plenty of interest rate reduction. Banks have money if they want to lend it. Companies can get money if they want to borrow it. The issue now is, do banks really want to lend in certain environments, and do businesses really want to expand? So the Fed is comfortable with raising rates. They'll probably do it 2 more times this year, maybe 3. The big question now is whether they will spend the latter part of the year trying to deal with their balance sheet. Remember a few years back, we used to panic at how much the Chinese held of our national debt. And it was like, oh my God, they owe 16%, they could crush our economy. Of course, if they did that, they'd crush their own. So that was something that was not ever really much of a risk. But the good news is that percentage is down to about 6 or 7%. The Chinese don't own nearly as much percentage-wise as they used to. The reason for that is that the Fed now owns the majority of that debt. At the beginning of the recession, the balance sheet was about $800 billion. It is now $7.3 trillion. And that was what happened with quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3. And if you were following QE 1, 2, and 3, they were slightly similar, but they had a little bit different intent. The only one that really worked the way it was supposed to is QE 1. The first round of quantitative easing was designed to take the mortgage-backed securities off the backs of banks. Banks had bought a lot of MBS, and it was weighing them down. They were not in a position to do much lending. So the Fed bought most of them, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. QE 2 and 3 were designed to be more stimulative, and it meant the Fed was going to buy a lot more treasuries and try to stimulate the economy that way. Kind of a mixed bag. Sort of worked, sort of didn't, but what it did do was saddle the Fed with a lot of that debt. They now want to try to get rid of it. Some of it they're just going to let roll over. I mean, it's just, you know, they're not going to do anything, they'll just let it convert. Some of it they're going to actively try to sell. Where this affects investors is that it more or less closes off the market to anybody else's bonds. I mean, if you're trying to sell corporate bonds, if you're trying to sell municipal bonds, if you're trying to sell anything, while the Fed is trying to unload treasuries, good luck. Because if you're a bond buyer, you're by nature conservative. If you were looking for the big fast returns, you'd be in the equity market. But if you're going after bonds, you want to go after the most secure bond you can buy. That's a T-bill. You know, it's going to be a lot more, particularly now, because back in the day, you could make the argument that a corporate bond from, say, General Motors was tremendously secure. That was until General Motors said, no, it's not. We're going to pay you pennies on the dollar, jump. Munis used to be really secure. That was before, you know, Detroit and San Bernardino, and, you know, it's like, oh, so munis can be defaulted on too, can they? T-bills, on the other hand, not so much. They're coming out of the federal government. Inflation is about where we need it to be. What's weird about inflation right now is it's being driven by wages, not by commodities. And usually it's the other way around. I mean, whenever we've had inflation in the past, it's been oil prices, it's been commodities, it's been food, it's been something that has driven inflation, and then everybody reacts. Right now, we're looking at oil prices that are going to stay low for years, if not decades. We are literally in an oil glut situation that we are not going to get out of, which is good news for some, bad news for others. I mean, as recently as the 1970s and 80s, we thought we had no oil. I mean, we were out of the game. You know, the U.S. was no longer an oil producer. Not anymore. We're the #1 oil producer in the world, and we will be for a long time. The Saudis have now exploited a little over 55% of their known reserves. They're on the downhill slope. They're not getting any more oil. They're using the last of what they have, and it's going to, you know, carry on for 10, 20, 30 years, but it's not the boom country anymore. We have exploited 5% of the oil that we know of in the Dakotas and Texas. And that's with no additional exploration. We just didn't know we could get it. We always knew it was there, we just didn't know how to get a hold of it, and now we do. We have almost 90 billion barrels of offshore oil. So we've got more oil than we know what to do with, and every time OPEC has tried to drive prices up, and they did it last fall, their traditional approach. The Saudis led the charge and said, by God, we're going to cut production and get those prices back up. And all the American producers said, awesome. It's like, when you cut production, we'll ramp ours up. And the Saudis were like, damn it, this used to work. It's like, doesn't now. There's lots of players. And it makes it almost impossible to control the supply of oil. Plus the fact that we're now going into what we would describe as peak demand. Instead of worrying about peak supply, we're worrying about, have we reached the point that this is all the oil we're ever going to consume? You know, we have become more conservation oriented, not necessarily deliberately, but just things have changed. I mean, the biggest consumer of energy, utilities, and the automotive sector. And both of them have gotten extremely efficient and much more oriented towards trying to produce what they do at an inexpensive rate. Cars. Back when I was a kid, I had a friend whose dad had a Chevy Suburban, and I swear that thing got 8 feet to the gallon. I mean, it's just like, we stopped even trying to borrow it because it was like, why? There's no way we can afford to fill the tank. Chevy Suburbans at 26 miles to the gallon now. You know, you can buy cars that get 45, 50, 55 miles to the gallon. We're not using like we used to. Utilities had done a lot of shifting from coal to gas. Now, there's been a lot of pressure on coal, climate change, all that, but the utilities are just shifting because for the first time in decades, we have so much gas that the price is stable. And the utilities don't have to worry about those booms and busts like they used to. And gas is simply easier to deal with. So we're going into an extended period of low commodity prices. Wages, not so much, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, depending on your interest. We now have a kind of an unusual situation when it comes to employment. We have virtually full employment, depending on how you measure it, and that we had a conversation just a few minutes ago about economists and data. And for somebody who speaks to accountants as much as I do, you'd think we've reconciled this by now. The accountant looks at 2 plus 2 and gets 4. The economist looks at 2 plus 2 and says, what do you want it to be? You know, we're a little flexible. So, you know, you look at unemployment. The unemployment rate is 4.4. Kinda. That's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have 6 different cuts when it comes to unemployment. This is U3. U3 is the simplest of the 6 cuts, simplest questions, 2 of them. One of them is, are you working? Yes or no? And if the answer to this is no, the second question is, are you formally looking for work? Are you going to the unemployment office? Are you getting an unemployment check? If the answer to that is no, you're no longer in U3. You get picked up by U6. U6 now calls you a discouraged worker. You're unemployed, but you're not formally looking for work. U6 is always at least twice U3. So when we looked at the new unemployment rates, 4.4, yeah, that's U3. U6 has us at about 9.5, so almost 10%. But U6 eliminates you from consideration if you've been out of work for 3 years or longer. Well, you didn't just disappear, you're still out there, unemployed, doing something. And it's the doing something part that's interesting from an economist's perspective, because according to groups like Shadow Stats If you add in the people who've dropped out of U6, the unemployment rate is probably closer to 15 or 16%. So it's relatively high. Not higher than most countries in the world, but on a par with Europe, because they figure their unemployment more like the U6 version than our U3 version. The interesting thing about the people that have dropped out is that they now form the gray economy, and it's a pretty significant part of our economy now. You have an awful lot of licit and illicit behavior that's not necessarily formal. Good example of the licit type, my neighborhood, like many neighborhoods, all built about the same time, the same electric company did all the work, Daryl worked for the electric company, then the housing bust came, company goes out of business, Daryl loses his job. So what does Daryl do? Daryl starts going door to door. Says, do you or any member of your family work for the IRS? And if the answer to that is no, need some wiring done? So one day I'm talking to Daryl while I'm getting some wiring done. And Daryl, what do you make doing this? Well, about $65,000 a year, tax-free. Is Daryl ever going to go back to work? Hell no. It's just like until he gets caught, it's just like, what a deal. I'm just going to do this off books. My grandson is a large animal veterinarian in the middle of Missouri, and almost a third of what he's paid is barter. It's like he goes in and somebody needs some work on the cow and hasn't got a lot of money, and I need my cows worked on. Yeah, but you haven't got any money. Well, that's my daughter's horse, and she went on to college and didn't really want it anymore. I'll take it. My grandson has 7 horses, none of which he paid for. They're all, swap and shop. Yeah, he's paying for them now. That's for damn sure. But, we all know the farm economy is largely informal. There's an awful lot of, I'll fix your tractor if you give me this, and, so that never gets counted, and there's an awful lot of activity out in the farm sector that is informal. Then, of course, you have the illicit activity, and whether we want to admit it or not, the drugs trade makes up about a third of our GDP. There's good money to be made selling meth in Kansas. So there's a lot of that, and they don't fill out forms. As economists, we complain. Come on, and they're like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell anybody what I make selling cocaine. That's just, it's none of your business, moving on. But it's a part of the economy, and you have to account for it because it's one of the things that's driving certain parts of the country, certain neighborhoods and cities. It's there. So from the standpoint of inflation, where we're getting it on the wage side is that we're dealing with a chronic shortage of people with the appropriate skills in a lot of industries, manufacturing, transportation, construction. Right now, for example, it's almost a year's wait in Dallas for a drywall team. So if you're building a house, it's going to take you 2 or 3 years just because there's nobody to build the house. Manufacturing, there are estimates of 800 to 900,000 jobs available right now, paying anywhere between $50,000 and $80,000 a year in manufacturing if you had people who had the skills. Schools like this are critical, and they continually get overlooked. Everyone is just like, wow, we need to throw money at higher education. I'm not so sure. Last year we graduated 20,000 people with degrees in pottery. So if you need a good new ceramicist, you're in good shape. And I used to work for a school that the senior faculty member who headed up the curricula committee was the ceramics teacher. So she demanded that every single student in that college take a course in ceramics. Accounting majors, engineering majors, pre-med, finance, all of them had to take a course in ceramics, which led to a kind of an interesting end-of-term tradition. Every year, at the end of school, everyone would gather at the local skeet range and fire their ceramics into the air. So it was a big fundraiser, blowing up hundreds of ashtrays made by accountants. Because it's like, the hell, put 2 grooves in it, call it an ashtray. So it But it's common. We have way too much emphasis on sort of the wrong things and not enough emphasis on the right things. What it's led to is that if you want to hire somebody in construction, manufacturing, transportation, healthcare, many of the others, you end up poaching other people's workers. You can't find a pipeline, you can't find newbies that want to come in to work for you, not with the right, so you poach other people. That drives wages up, because you're not going to poach somebody unless you offer them more money, and the company that's being poached is going to start adding more money to their workers because they don't want them to be poached. Good for the workers, they're going to get a little bit more money, but for a lot of small to medium-sized companies, this is really cutting into the margin, and pretty soon they really can't compete. Most of the manufacturers that I talk to with fabricators and manufacturers, and these are mostly people in the metals business, overwhelmingly 60%, 70% in the surveys that we do would expand if they could find workers. And they are turning down business, walking away from business because they can't find people to work. And if they do find them, they can't keep them. We have a system that really isn't very protective when it comes to business, and it's almost impossible to keep an employee if they want to leave. I mean, you can train them, you can do all this stuff, and then as soon as they get the training, it's like, hey, thanks, I'm going to work for the guy across the street.
Pardon me, what was that number that you mentioned at the top just a couple minutes ago? The number of jobs?
Oh yeah, within the manufacturing alone, it's around 800,000. Within construction, the estimate is around 500,000. Transportation, we're currently short 300,000 drivers. So trucking companies will delay the response and say, yeah, we got the tractor, got trailer, got everything. But until Bob comes back from his latest run, we got nobody to drive the truck. So, hang in there, we'll get to it. And so you have people that leave, they get the training and they go. Germany, for example, has a very different approach to a lot of this, and one of the things that helps the German company is that 60% of German students are in tech schools or vocational schools. Overwhelming number. I mean, the Germans are, they're Germans. When you're 12 years old, you take the gymnasium exam, and that's what tells you what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's like, you would be a good mechanic. I'm 12. Yes, you've had 10 years to prepare. It's like, did this test come as a surprise to you? Talk to your older brother. He took it. That's why he's a ditch digger. So the German companies basically sponsor, in conjunction with educational institutions, the training. And the deal is, in Germany, is that for every year of training that you receive, you owe the company 5. And most of the training programs are 4 years long. So the German company is like, I have you for 2 decades. After this, you can go look for another job. But you'll be 50. So good luck with that. The Germans have no problem at all investing in training because they get to keep the people they train. So we've got to get better at protecting the small business. I mean, a good example of what's happening in a lot of companies is radically extended work lives. My favorite example of this is a guy who's the chief mechanic and kind of their overall supervisor for all things mechanical at a job shop north of Chicago. Bill is 95 years old and still works a 50 to 55 hour week. And so you talk to Bill and say, Bill, are you not thinking of retiring? You're 95 years old. He goes, why should I retire? All my friends are dead. I've buried 3 wives. The only people I know are the people I work with. What am I supposed to do? Go enjoy my golden weeks? It's just like, so it's like, Bill, are you not thinking of your replacement? I mean, you're 95. He says, man, I've trained everybody in town. As soon as I train them, they go to work for somebody else. We can't afford them. We're a small job shop. They get $3, $4, $5 an hour more than we can afford to pay. So off they go. He says, we got the Bill lottery here. One of these days I ain't going to wake up and whoever's working that day has got my job. The company built him a $50,000 exoskeleton so that he can pick stuff up. And the only challenge is he wants to take it home. He says, at home, I'm an old man, I can barely open a jar of beets, but here I'm the Hulk. You know, I mean, it's just like, and the owner of the company sits in his office every morning, waits for Bill's truck to pull up, and gets on the intercom and says, we're doing business, Bill's here. It's like, God, you know, there's a company with a long-term future. But Bill, ever the optimist, just got married again last year. Wife number 4. She's only 71, so she might outlive him this time, maybe. You know, it's like you look at Bill, a little wiry guy, and it's just like, I don't think he's ever going to die. So, but down the road from the same company, I'm talking to another guy, and you know, I'm talking about Bill, and he goes, "Yeah, it's pretty amazing," and but he doesn't seem all that impressed, and it's like, "Well, yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?" No, not really. You want to meet our 2 new apprentices? Sure. So I'm thinking, awesome, I get to meet some young buck, you know, 20-something. The 2 new apprentices are 73 years old. And it's like, and they're excited because those were among the younger applicants. And it's just like, you know, we have a manufacturing sector that's dependent on 70 and 80 and 90-year-old men. And it's like, you know, they're going to try not to die. You know, Bill's got a reason to live now. You know, I met her, she's pretty cute. So, but sooner or later, you know, time marches on, and we have the same issue throughout. The lead carpenter in the construction sector is 59 years old. The average age of an industrial welder in the U.S. is 67. The average age of an over-the-road truck driver is 62. You know, and it's, millennials are becoming the dominant population, but millennials aren't going into that work. And we're going to have some interesting conversations about that too. The millennials are, they're kind of the hot thing now. They're all cool, and they're all going to live in tiny houses and work for Starbucks. But the generation that I feel the sorriest for are Gen Xers. Nobody cares about you at all. The boomers have been dominating since birth. The millennials are now as cool as can be. And the Gen Xers are just the ones doing all the work. And they're also beginning to realize that at some point in the not distant future, their children and their parents are going to be living with them. You know, and they're like, oh my God, you know, at 45 or 50, I thought I'd have my own room, you know, but that's not going to happen. So it's the much put upon generation. Millennials are different in a lot of respects, particularly as economic citizens. You know, they are not nearly as aggressive as consumers, as boomers were. Boomers had the attitude that he who dies with the most stuff wins. And millennials are experience buyers. They like to go to concerts, and they travel, and they go to fine restaurants. They're foodies and all this sort of stuff. And they don't have a desire to buy houses or start families. And that's beginning to affect housing. The average millennial is still quite comfortable in an apartment or a loft or their parents' basement, and they're not looking to move anytime. They're not starting families as soon. You know, I'm a boomer. You know, I remember back in the day, parents leaning over your shoulder going, you're 21, let's get going. I want grandkids, chop chop. Time marches on, let's go. And the millennials are just, no, let me clarify here. My children are supposed to bring me the joy I brought you. I don't want one of me. You know, it's just like, I've made your life a living hell. You know, why would I invite that into my own? So I've also noticed that within millennial families, there's like a designated birther. There's one sister that has all the kids. And everybody just borrows them. You know, it's just like, I don't want to go to the Disney flick alone. I feel like an idiot. I'm going to borrow my niece. And I'm going to fill her full of jujubes and raisinets and buy her an air horn on the way home and deliver her and say, wow, she's all wound up. And off I go. You know, I mean, it's like, and at some point there's going to be mass fratricide where these daughters and sisters are going to start murdering their relatives. And the courts will not find them guilty. You know, they'll just sit there entirely justified. So what do we do with some of those employment issues? I was at a technical college yesterday, and Part of the issue is communicating to parents. You know, part of it is getting across to parents what careers are like now, what their progeny can expect in these businesses. They don't understand what happens in manufacturing or construction or transportation, and they don't understand the potential, you know, what it takes to even be in that world. When I was still a teacher, I learned early that people had different learning styles. I mean, I thought that was important to know as a professor, and one of the shocking things to discover is that this is the worst kind of teaching imaginable. Only about 6% of the population can learn this way. The average person has an attention span of about 6 minutes, which meant that about 20 minutes ago you were like, you know, you were thinking about all kinds of stuff, and you're working on your iPad, and you know, you haven't listened to a word I said. 25% of the population is a kinetic learner. They learn with their hands. And if you put a kinetic learner in an environment like this, you will drive them insane. I used to be able to figure out my kinetic learners when there were still styrofoam coffee cups, because within about 5 minutes, all the kinetic learners had ripped the styrofoam cup into tiny little pieces, kind of going, will he ever shut up? You know, so, but I ask you, you know, I mean, if your car breaks down in the middle of the highway at a dark, stormy night, do you call an economist or a mechanic? You know, I can show up and give you a graph that shows you just how screwed you are. But, you know, that's about all I can do. The mechanic could actually fix the car. And so we need a whole lot more people understanding those worlds and becoming more adept. Because manufacturing, transportation, construction, all of them have changed. They're all more technological, robotic. I mean, if you were to tour this school, you would see machines and technology that would just take your breath away. And I go to these big manufacturing shows every year, and it's just, you just completely geek out when you look at the stuff that they're making. And after a while, you start to realize that every single thing you touch was manufactured. Somebody made it. Somebody had to think of it, design it, make it. You know, these shows they have on cable TV where, you know, I was watching the process that they use to make thimbles. There's like 50 machines involved to make a thimble, and you're like, seriously, it's a thimble. But, you know, somebody came up with machines to make thimbles. So we at some point have to have a kind of a heart-to-heart. A little bit on the current administration and what we can expect differently from what we've had in the past. We were talking about this before the session started too. You've got a very different kind of politician. And actually, he's not a politician, and that's part of the challenge and the opportunity. We wanted an outsider, we got one. And that also means that you've got somebody with a really steep learning curve, trying to figure out how to play in a world very different from the one he came from. Even as a businessman, he was a certain kind of businessman. He ran a privately controlled business. And anyone who runs privately controlled businesses know they are very different from publicly held companies. You answer to nobody. It's your company. You know, you do whatever you want. I mean, you're really the boss. Some of the people in the corporate world who are now trying to advise Trump are saying, you need to walk a mile in my shoes, because I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company. And the easy thing is to say, oh, well, we're controlled by the shareholders, none of whom will agree on anything. So every time there's an attempt to ask them what their opinions are, sell, buy, no, grow, shrink, do this, hire, don't hire, fire. Like, how am I supposed to keep all of you people happy? There's no way. You just have to try to create little coalitions. Well, that's Congress. We live in a country that was deliberately designed not to work. This was a country invented by James Madison. If you go back and read the Federalist Papers and all those sorts of things, he was the architect of our system. James Madison was the single most depressed, cynical, suspicious politician in history. He thought everybody was corrupt, everybody was evil, everybody was out to exploit everybody else, and that if you wanted to avoid a tyranny, you had to create a system where nobody really had power. So we have a system now, very different from any other democracy in the world, where the legislature can undo the executive can undo the legislature, the Supreme Court can undo both of them, we can both undo the Supreme Court. There are state laws that supersede national laws that supersede state laws. You've got to get a lot of people on the same page. For example, a wall. And nobody's really talking about this except in Texas. Texas is an independent country masquerading as a state. When they came into the Union, they were an independent country. And they demanded that many of their laws be absorbed as part of the system. We are not going to come in unless you recognize our laws. One of those is there's no eminent domain in Texas. You cannot take anybody's land. The wall has to be built on the US side, and there are a bunch of Texans going, get off my land. And when you understand the average Texan has 55 guns, you know, it's like, that's going to be some interesting negotiating. It's like, we want to put a wall here. Did you not hear me? Get off my land. It's my land, and in Texas, you put 1 foot on my land, I'm allowed to kill you. You're trespassing. I don't care if you stumbled and fell into my land. The second you touch my land, you're a dead man. So we may have a wall that goes California, Arizona, New Mexico, at which point people are likely to figure out a way to get around it. You know, it's just like, let's go to Texas instead. We have lots of those kinds of issues, and it's going to be almost every one of the things that were developed during the campaign, there's going to be a challenge. For example, infrastructure. Everybody likes infrastructure. It's great. It builds things. We'll be happy. We need $1 trillion to do this. We don't have $1 trillion to do this. So the debate's going to be essentially between those who want to spend it and those who are worried about the debt and deficit and don't want to spend it. The head of the Office of Management and Budget now is Mick Mulvaney, the congressman from South Carolina, who was the head of the Tea Party. When you would ask Mick what he felt about federal spending, he'd say, "What'd you cut, Mick?" "Everything." "What do you mean everything?" "Everything. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the military, highway department. I don't want any more federal employees, period, ever." That's a pretty extreme position. And he says, yeah, you know, I'm going to have to compromise, but it ain't going to be easy. You know, I'm going to make sure that every dime is accounted for. Well, his nemesis is going to be the Secretary of Transportation, because that's where most of the infrastructure stuff's going to be. That's Elaine Chao. Elaine Chao's husband is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. So at some point you're going to see Mitch put his arm around Mick and say, "Mick, honey, do you still want that GOP help for your political career? Do not irritate my wife. It is a losing proposition, I guarantee you." That's going to be the battle of the titans. I mean, neither one of them is going to back down, and it's going to be a challenge. You see with this government something reminiscent of what Reagan did, kind of what Eisenhower did too. These are people who came to power without really a cadre. Most presidents have this inner circle that they bring with them. They've been with them forever. The Bushes, the Clintons, Obama, all of them had this group that just sort of came in when they came to power. Reagan did not, and Trump did not. They went into this with the attitude that I'll pick talented people who can get the job done and bring them in as my cabinet, as my advisors. And that's great, except they don't know each other. They don't really know Trump, and they're not necessarily ever going to be on the same page. And you've already seen transitions. You're not going to tell Mad Dog. I mean, Mad Dog. That's kind of an indicative nickname, don't you think? So, you know, he's not going to change his opinions because of somebody's other opinion. So, and you look through the entire cabinet, you've got people like this. During the campaign, we were going to get out of NAFTA, we were going to completely abandon it. Now we're going to renegotiate it a little bit and nibble around the edges, and gee, what changed? Wilbur Ross is what changed. Commerce Secretary has done a lot of business with Latin America, and we made a big deal out of, you know, Trump's riches, and Ross at one point said, "Just to clarify, you do know that I'm worth 15 times what Trump is worth." He says, I can actually buy a Fortune 500 company outright, and I have. So it's like, I'm not impressed with wealth. You know, what has he done compared to what I've done? And I made a lot of money in Mexico, don't intend to lose a lot of money in Mexico, so we're not going to change it that much. And everyone's like, okay. You know, it's just reality. You know, things that Trump didn't know much about beginning during the campaign. He hated the Export-Import Bank. We're going to get rid of this because somebody told him that it was a bad idea. Then he gets to be president and starts to figure out what the Export-Import Bank does and goes, oh, I like this. This is great. And it's like, I thought you hated it. Well, I didn't know what it did before. Now I do. So, again, not a politician. Politicians are good at never, ever, ever saying anything. You know, I mean, it's like you ask a politician a question and they're like, well, that's a question. The questions are often answered, but sometimes they're not answered, but it was a good question, and I often get questions that are good questions, and sometimes they're not such good questions, but I don't answer either one of them. You know, and it's like, you know, Trump is one of these people that says, what do you think? You know, it's like, you know, I mean, McConnell yesterday was like, we could use with a little less drama out of the White House. We're not used to having somebody who just speaks their mind. And if they change their mind, they say so. And it's like, well, don't think that anymore. How come? Well, learn something. Oh my God, politicians don't learn anything. They're not allowed to. You know, I mean, it's like, I've had this position since I was 6. It's like, but times have changed. No, they haven't. Not in my head. So it's going to take a while for things to kind of filter out. We're not quite sure what motivates a lot of the commentary because he's not careful. And at some point he'll start to be more careful. You know, it's kind of like referenced Bernanke a few minutes ago. You know, he didn't know what he was doing as Fed chair either. You know, he was an academic. And so the very first thing he did is he wanted to educate. So he brings the money honey up and is going to talk to Maria Bartiromo and explain to her how all this works. And tells her that, you know, he expects this to be off the record. So the very next day, blah, you know, and he goes, my God, I told her it was off the record. Ben, honey, you're not a professor anymore. You can't flunk her. You know, she's going to do what she does. She's the media. You can't trust the media with any information, no matter what you say. So he learned the hard way, and we're going to see a lot of that in this administration. A good indication of kind of the patience of the business community is that most of the economic data is getting better and better with every month. We just got new numbers today for industrial production, yesterday. Industrial production is a good indicator of kind of overall economic health, and it's been kind of bumping along. There's 3 parts of industrial production. There's manufacturing, utilities, and mining. Manufacturing has done okay. I mean, they've been sort of holding their own through this, but the other 2 were in free fall. Now, all of a sudden, they're both looking good. Utilities kind of got through the winter. This is the bad winter for utilities. It was warm. They didn't sell much power. Now we're getting into a hotter time of the year, and they're making more money again. Mining, you know, the oil sector is not back to where it was, but it's kind of adjusting to the new reality, and it's producing more oil again. So all 3 of those sectors are doing well. There are a number of indicators that are more reliable than some. The truism with economics and data really anywhere is you can have it fast or you can have it accurate. You can't have both. So we get information like the GDP numbers. We got those about a week or so ago. 0.7% growth in the first quarter. That's awful. And everybody that was not really familiar with how data goes were like, oh my God, that's terrible. And the economists were like, oh, chill out. We're going to revise it in a month, and then we'll revise it again in 6 months, and then we'll revise it again in a year, and then we'll revise it again in another year. We're not going to know what first quarter GDP for 2017 was until about 2019. Well, that's not very helpful. No, it just takes a while. You know, it's a lot of numbers that got to come in from all directions. The current stuff are always surveys, and surveys are great, they're current, but they're frequently biased. People lie through their teeth in surveys, particularly consumers. They don't mean to, but you ask consumers, are you confident? Oh, yes. I'm very confident. Okay, well then how come retail sales have been down for 4 months? I'm not that confident. I mean, it's just like, well, what is it? Are you confident or not? Well, I don't know. It's like, well, how are you expected to know? I mean, it's like, the guy on TV said I should be confident. I don't even know what my neighbors are doing, much less the country as a whole, so how am I supposed to know? So the consumer confidence surveys are always, a little iffy. They can get totally thrown off by some event. I mean, we used to know that gas prices would change consumer confidence overnight. So if you were asking people about their confidence level the day that prices went up, everyone was like, oh my God, the price of gas has went up a nickel, I'm going to have to sell my children. You are not, but all of a sudden the confidence levels just crash. If the price of gas went down, everyone's like, awesome, price just went down a nickel, I'm going to buy a boat. You are not, I mean, it's just like, what is wrong with you? It just has no impact on you whatsoever, but it's just like, yeah, but I'm really confident now. It's like, you idiots, so you have to go for surveys where people are either not going to lie or don't know enough to lie, which is why I like the Purchasing Managers Index. The Purchasing Managers Index has been around for quarter of a century, and it is asking purchasing managers what they're purchasing. Well, they don't know enough about anything to give you anything but the raw data. I mean, you ask a purchasing manager, you buy more or less steel. More? How come? I don't know. I don't even know what we'd make. It's like some committee said we needed more steel and we're out of toilet paper. I mean, it's like I buy stuff. I don't know why. That's not my job. So when they report data, it's just data. It just is. It's like, wow, you can see if steel purchasing is up, you can see whatever is up or down, because it's just the data. And the PMI numbers are also designed to be really easy to understand. Anything over 50 is expansion, anything under 50 is contraction, and right now we're at about 54.3. We were at 57 point something the month before, so we're up in respectable territory. This is expansion territory. It rarely ever gets more than about 63, 64. So when you get into the high 50s, you're in pretty good company. Another index that's similar to it, which is the one that I run for the National Association for Credit Management, is the Credit Managers Index. We simply stole the methodology from the PMI. It's public, it's not illegal, so we just took it. We use the same diffusion index they use. Credit managers are just like purchasing managers. They have basement offices with no windows as well, and nobody even knows they're there. But credit managers are the ones that are controlling who gets credit to buy machinery, inventory, whatever it is they're buying from a company. And we track things like sales and applications for credit and amount of credit, and we look at the negatives like accounts out for collection and slow pays and disputes and bankruptcies. Our numbers are also up in the mid-50s, and for the positives, things like sales and applications and dollar collection, they're up in the 60s, which is a really good number. We had a weird 3-month period where we had really good numbers, really bad numbers, really good numbers. The bad numbers came from 2 factors, and they changed dramatically in a month. One bad trend was dollar collections. All of a sudden, those were way down. This is very depressing to a credit manager. That's what they are supposed to do, is collect money. So people were suddenly not paying. And at the same time, slow pays increased. And you had a lot of companies that were a little on the edge and going to the companies that they had gotten credit from and saying, yeah, I know I got 30-day terms, but can I have like 45, maybe 60? And credit managers always have a tough call at this point, because if it's an important customer and you try to cut them off, your boss is going to show up and say, what are you doing? This is 60% of our business. If they need another month, give them another month. But then it becomes 3 months and 6 months, and that same boss goes, how did these people get so far behind? You told me to, you twit. So, it's a tough place to be in. So that's usually the first sign of bigger trouble. The very next month, dollar collection's back to normal. slow pace, back to normal. And when we've seen that pattern before, it indicates that companies are getting ready to expand. If you want to ask for more credit, good idea to be caught up with your current credit. So suddenly everything was beginning to catch up, and we're seeing the promise of some pretty decent activity coming on through the summer, maybe even into the fall. You couple that with some other numbers, capacity utilization numbers are going back up again. This is how much of a given capacity a company is using. Ideally, they want to be between 80 and 85%. 80% is the low end, 85% is the high end of normal. If you're under 80%, you've got too much slack, and you're not likely to buy any more equipment, you're not likely to hire. If you get over 85%, that's when you start getting too much pressure, bottlenecks start to show up, inflation begins to become an issue. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've been 73, 72, 74% capacity. Not awful, but not that close to 80. Now we're at about 78.9. We're beginning to come right close to that bottom end of normal. At the same time, we've seen more capital investment. This was down for quite a while. Now it's beginning to come back up, and when I talk to machine tool makers, they say they've been complaining for almost a year. All of the people who were looking to buy machinery had come to them and say, I really, really, really want to buy that laser cutter, that press brake, that whatever. Don't need it right now, but I want to be on the list, because when I do need it, I'm going to need it. So the order was placed, and then the company's, hi, it's really nice to have the order placed, but we'd really like to actually sell the damn thing so that we can make some money off of this. And they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the companies to say, okay, now's the time. And that's starting to happen. You're beginning to see, particularly in not so much the automotive sector, that may have peaked a little bit, but it's going up in aerospace, it's going up in healthcare manufacturing, it's going up in a certain amount of the oil and gas and energy sector. You're seeing growth in kind of interesting technological areas. And again, we were having a conversation just a minute ago about technology and how it evolves. We're sort of swamped every day by new changes in technology. And what we have seen with technology providers is that they frequently just throw something out there and wait to see how we're going to use it. They don't really know yet how they're going to be used. Almost everything that we've seen the last 15, 20 years defied prediction. I mean, cell phones. Cell phones were supposed to be a businessman's tool. The only people who were going to buy a cell phone were businessmen, so that they could communicate on the road. I mean, that was, you go back and you look at the strategies, there's a limited market for this. It's just going to be businessmen that travel. Everybody else is perfectly happy with their landlines, and that's going to be the end. It was Japan that said, oh, no. What's going to drive the cell phone is 12-year-old girls texting each other. And so, like, businessmen hardly even use their phones anymore. It's just a mobile answering machine. You know, it's kind of like, I don't want to pick up the damn call. Who are you? You know, so most people I know just wait till the end of the day and answer their voicemails. You know, they barely even use it except to play solitaire or, you know, text or whatever. So virtually everything that we're encountering from a technological point of view is evolving. How will we use robotics? How will we use technology in our everyday life? Most of the time, we defy predictions and use it for things that people never anticipated. You're seeing that with Uber. You know, Uber was supposed to be a replacement for taxi cabs and would be just like cabs. It isn't. People use Uber far more often than they ever use cabs. I mean, it's just, you have an entire generation, the millennials, who aren't going to buy cars. Why? Just take an Uber. You know, I mean, it's just, because all of a sudden they start to figure stuff out, like, okay, what I plan to do this afternoon is go drink. You know, I'm going to go to a party, and like, I don't want to be arrested for DUI. Call an Uber. You know, I mean, it's just like, you talk to Uber drivers and they go, oh man, college towns on a Saturday, ka-ching. You know, it's just like, I once talked to a guy that said, did you know that you can get 6 frat boys in a Prius? And it's like, no, I would have liked to have seen pictures. He says, man, I wish I had taken them. I mean, it was like a clown car, I mean, it was like, but, and they're all paying full freight because they want to get home after having a frat party. So I've been rattling on for hours, and I can do this all day, I mean, I used to be a professor after all. So at this point, let's go for questions. Yes, my tech guy.
So there's been a bunch of releases this week about the death of retail as we know it.
Right.
Using big terms like Armageddon. They've got some of our brand name companies that are going under. I think even Sears finally admitted they're dead, even though.
Right, dead men walking.
But then there's this pop in retail spend in like restaurants for the millennials you're suggesting. How do you foresee retail evolving, not only from the Gen Xer generation where we go out and shop, where is it going now?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation because that whole model has changed. The online shopping experience is preferred by many, many people. And there's a good example of a technology that everybody misunderstood. Remember a few years back, oh, it'll never catch on. No one's going to put their credit card out on the internet. Really? It's just all of us shop online now. And for a lot of us, it's the perfect thing. It really has not yet damaged specialty stores. It's really going after the department stores because you went to a department store for variety. Well, you can't get much more variety than online, so no department store can compete. So there's 2 reactions. Number one is to kind of adopt what's happening with the online world. That's been Walmart, so Walmart develops its own online capability to compete with Amazon and will probably hold its own. The other option is to copy more of what the specialty shops have done and turn shopping into shopotainment. And if you look at a lot of the little stores that have bucked the trend and have not been driven out of business, I think of one in Kansas City. The big bookstore chains obliterated the small bookstores. So for the most part, they went under. And now the big chains themselves are being challenged by the Amazons of the world. Well, then there's Rainy Day Books, which is this little bitty bookstore that just absolutely slaughters everybody in Kansas City. Drove Borders out, basically drove Barnes & Nobles out. It doesn't even phase by Amazon. Why? Because Vivian Jennings brings in authors every single day to give talks at her bookstore. So, she has this loyal following that just goes to her shop every single day for the little luncheon sessions or the morning sessions where they can meet the authors. This year already, she's had 172 authors come through her store. Nobody can compete with that. Because not only do you get to, it's the social thing. It's everybody's opportunity to meet one another, and they all hang out at the bookstore, and yeah, they're of a certain age for the most part, but they all walk out of the store with books. And she's as happy as a clam. So you're seeing concerts in stores, coffee shops in stores, sporting events in stores. It's just, I was at a Target that was doing an experiment because they had a part of the store that was fundamentally empty. So they turned it into a paintball. And it's just like, we are, after all, Target. And so people would show up at the Target store and play paintball, and buy all sorts of supplies. Well, while you're there, might as well, pick up some other stuff. So you're kind of seeing retail try to figure out how it becomes a destination, and because that's the only way that it's going to compete with online. Most of the bigger stores are going to struggle. Sears is gone, Kmart's gone, Macy's is barely hanging on. Their strategy now is to become an entirely discount-oriented seller, which is a radical change for Macy's. The Nordstroms of the world, they'll probably survive for a while on cachet alone, and they'll be able to compete to some degree because they don't sell their stuff anywhere but the store. So if you want that product, you have to go to that store. But even that's limited. People lose interest in that product.
Probably an unfair question, but you've talked a lot domestically. Give me a quick scan internationally. What's got your attention? You know, Russia, China, what's going on?
Yep. It won't be quick. I can guarantee you that. No, I mean, international is you could tell by the intro, was kind of my first thing. I taught international finance and economics, and all this stuff going on about Russia right now has been interesting too, because I started off as a Soviet and East European specialist. I was going to work for the CIA, study the evil empire, lived in the Soviet Union for a year in the 80s, learned Russian, the whole 9 yards. And it's just like, so I look at all this controversy and I'm like, are you not aware that they're still godless communists? And they always will be. You know, I mean, it's just like, do Russians have spies here? No. Really? You know, it's like, you're kidding me, right? They have been trying to get to us since they began, and that will never change. I don't know quite what Trump is trying to do. I don't know if he's trying to charm them, if he's under their thrall. It's a complicated place, and they're not on the same page as we are. And, you know, like I said, my background is to trust them as far as I can throw the entire country. Europe, on the other hand, is beginning to pull itself together. At the beginning of the year, the terror in Europe was that it was going to be part of this populist wave, and that you're going to have leaders all over Europe that were going to challenge the EU and challenge everything else about Europe. The first kind of moment of relief was the Dutch elections. You had Geert Wilders, who was the populist, and he was way ahead in the polls until the very last minute, and then all the Dutch were like, what are we thinking? And did not elect Wilders. Then you had France, and this has been absolutely captivating the Europeans, because no matter who you voted for, it was radical change. I mean, you have Marine Le Pen. National Front has always been a far-right fringe party. You know, her father used to fly the swastika over his headquarters, which you'd think would be a little uncomfortable in France. But she kind of civilized it a little bit and became part of the populist movement, made it into the second round. But all the traditional parties fell apart. So the socialists weren't competing, the Republicans weren't competing, and you have as her opponent Emmanuel Macron, who is brand new, had never been elected to anything. He had been a minister under Francois Hollande, youngest president France has ever had since Napoleon. He beats Napoleon by 3 months. And in many respects kind of symbolizes just the difference in the way the French look at things. I mean, one of the more entertaining discussions, because it took a while for the US to figure this out, that his wife was a lot older than him, 24 years older than him. And that they met when he was 15 and she was his 40-year-old high school teacher, and began a relationship at that point. And when he turned 17, then he could make it all official. So everyone was like, what? I mean, that would kind of disqualify you. But from my personal perspective, I was like, yes, because my wife is 12 years older than me. So I'm like, yes, let's hear it for men that are smart enough to marry older women to keep them out of trouble. So Macron is now trying to create a government with not one single member of parliament from his party. I mean, the elections are coming up in about a month, and he needs somebody to be on his side. So he's sort of hoping that there are enough defectors. He's got candidates running in all 577 districts, but we'll see how that turns out. Germany has been barreling along in good shape. Their economy is growing. Angela Merkel, the chancellor, looked to be in trouble a few months ago, but her party has been winning even in areas that are traditionally more liberal. So her chances of being reelected are very high. China is sort of showing what China has long been. We were very antagonistic. We were going to do this with China. We were going to make them a currency manipulator, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, all that's been abandoned. Because China's like, hi, we're China. You need us. We need you, by the way, but you need us. And if you think you have the capability of stopping that little pipsqueak in North Korea, you don't. Because you don't have any options left. I mean, all you can do is nuke him, and you know that starts World War III. We will take care of him, but you need to make it worth our while. So let's drop all this crap about trade barriers and currency manipulation, or we're not going to help you. And so all of a sudden that's been dropped, and the very day that we stopped and decided not to call them a currency manipulator, they moved 10,000 troops to the North Korean border, pointing at North Korea. And it's just kind of like, buddy, you do realize you exist because we let you exist. So China's like, yeah, don't forget the role that we play. We killed off the TPP, it wasn't a very good trade pact to begin with, but now we're resurrecting big parts of it because some of it made a lot of sense. It was good for agriculture, it was good for the high-tech sector here, it was going to be good for the service sector, insurance, law, marketing, accounting, things of that nature. So many of these things are coming back to life. We're just not being quite as open to the manufacturing sector as we had been. And we were leaving quite a few doors open, not so much for the countries we normally did. It wasn't a big deal for Japan, but it was a big deal for South Korea. And part of the reason now that we're not offering it to the South Koreans is they have a new leader too, Moon Jae-in, who's much more liberal than who he replaced, and now we don't like him so much. So it's like, screw your manufacturing. We think you're a nutball, and we don't want to help you. So it's one of the things that might start happening when it comes to promoting U.S. activity and exports. We may start to become a little more like other countries. You know, I talked about Merkel a minute ago. Angela Merkel sort of symbolizes how many European leaders combine politics and business. Whenever she goes on an overseas trip, her plane is full of German businessmen who get off first, and then she sort of indicates to the country that's asking for German help, if you are not making Jürgen happy, I am not going to make you happy. Take care of me, I may take care of you. She once showed up in Jakarta, and they met her at the airport in a nice, big, fancy Lexus. She wouldn't get off the plane. She said, you are aware that we don't make Lexus. We make Mercedes. Why are you not picking me up in a Mercedes? Do you think I'm here to promote Japanese cars? I am turning around in an hour unless you bring a Mercedes to pick me up. What's in it for me? Are you going to help anybody in my country? You know, I don't give a, I mean, because we used to do just the opposite. And a good example, remember the big hue and cry over rich guys buying corporate aircraft to fly around? You know, what a resentment. They should be standing in line like the rest of us, you know, worrying if at B-30 they were going to get the last aisle seat. So we took away the tax break to buy aircraft. By God, that'll show them. So did the rich people suddenly decide to start lining up for Zone 4? No, they bought their planes anyway from Brazil and Canada and anywhere else that they could buy a cheap plane. That tax break was only available to them if they bought an American plane, if they bought a Lear or a Beech or a Cessna from Wichita. So if the aim of taking away that tax break was to promote jobs in Sao Paulo, great work. But you kill Wichita, you know, so part of the hope is that, would you bring back, I mean, if you want rich people to spend, give them an incentive to, because otherwise they're gonna go for the cheapest option, and we won't usually be that cheapest option, so give them a break. That's gonna be one of, hopefully, the new deals when it comes to international trade and business, is a little bit more selfishness on our part, and a little less. Many of our trade deals have been political. You know, we're trying to cement relations with a country for political reasons, so we give them access to our economy. Now we need to be a little bit more protective of the economy and understand that, honestly, they don't really have a lot of choices politically anyway. So what are we expecting them to do? You know, it's like, if you don't side with us, good luck siding with the Chinese.
Isn't that long term though?
Yeah, it is.
That's been the strategy of the United States since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Like all these bases and.
Absolutely. We've been doing it forever. And it's kind of a holdover from the Cold War days. I mean, that's why we did it. I mean, we have all these relationships with countries because those are the battlegrounds between us and the Russians. And, well, we don't really have those kind of battlegrounds now. And so we may not necessarily need that kind of military presence, particularly the way warfare is fought now. I mean, if you want intervention, well, it's not going to come from a base anyway. I mean, it's going to be an aircraft carrier full of SEALs. And
It's
yes,
our
sir.
history though.
Oh,
Politics
yeah.
always takes a long time to catch up.
Oh, God, yes. You know, we're still adjusting to the 1830s, I think.
The robotics.
Right.
In terms of what's going on, I'm in the construction industry, and
Mhm.
we're short all trades. And shortly, there will not be anybody in the trades. They're all 50-plus years
Right.
old. But the robotics are coming into the manufacturing, which for plants that we built, we see
Mhm.
machinery coming in and replacing people.
Right.
How do we, as a economy, approach the fact that we're losing employment to
Mhm.
machinery? I mean,
Yep.
it's happened for decades.
Right.
It's not something that's new, but the robotics that are coming out now are just.
And it's accelerated. I mean, it's been happening for a while, but it really has picked up speed in the last 10 years. I mean, during the campaigns, and talk about politics not catching up, all this conversation about, oh, well, we're losing jobs to Mexico and China, and yeah, that was the 80s and 90s. We're losing jobs to robots now, and that's a whole different deal. And it's a logical response on the part of a business. I mean, you can't find somebody to work, so it's like, well, crap, I guess I'm going to buy a machine. I mean, I don't have any choice. There's nobody that's wanting to take this job. So there are goods and bads that come out of it. I mean, one thing is that robotics has made us more productive. We have become better when it comes to productivity in manufacturing, construction, and transportation. We hear a lot about the productivity decline in the U.S., but that's 3 industries. It is almost entirely due to the inefficiencies in healthcare, education, and the government. That's generally what has dragged down productivity. Productivity is up in manufacturing, construction, transportation, and others. So the good news is that the technology creates jobs as well as killing them, but they're higher level jobs. And so instead of hiring somebody to shove stuff around, I mean, there was a massive decline in employment in the manufacturing sector about 8 or 9 years ago, 20 million jobs. The vast majority of them were people that moved things around in a factory. And as soon as you bring in material handling systems, you fire 200 people. It had not been a dominant machine operation until you started getting the combination of electric eyes and conveyor belts, and you can actually replace people, and you can take stuff off a truck and run it through the whole operation, never touched by a human being. But you're also going to be replacing routinized jobs. Anything that can be done in a routine manner can be done by a machine. Now you're going to have to find people who can program that machine and know how to run the machine and know how to take care of the machine. Vast majority of manufacturers that I know look at their equipment and go, you know, this can do a lot more than I make it do. I just don't know how. I don't know what its capabilities are. I need a good operator that will sit there and say, we can make this, you know. We have the capability. This machine can do that. We don't do it now, but we could if you let us use the machine the way it was designed to. So we're going to have to be cognizant of the fact that the old traditional, you know, get a job in a manufacturing facility, work your way up, get a decent living, maybe a thing of the past. You're going to be sort of coming in at a higher level, assuming you've gotten the education. Now the starter jobs are going to be in the service sector. And they don't pay very well, and they don't have a lot of future, and they're being affected by technology too. I mean, when you think about all the things that we have accepted as consumers that have made our lives less convenient, even as we're being told it's more convenient. Again, we were having this talk. When I was a kid and visiting my grandmother in Shorewood, the most amazing thing on her house was this little door that she had on her back door. And it was magic, because every time I go to the door and open it up, there'd be something in there. Milk, cheese, vegetables, something, bread, everything was delivered. And it was just like, this is awesome. You know, it's like you open it up, it's like, wow, this is like magic. Well, now it's much more convenient for us to traipse around a grocery store that's like 7,000 square acres. You know, and it's just like, I just want a loaf of bread. And you look at your Fitbit, and wow, 2,000 steps just to get the bread. You know, I mean, it's just like, this is convenient. You know, it's like I pull up to a gas station. Wow, I'm gonna go give a talk smelling like gas, because I have to gas my own freaking car. And it's just like, I don't wanna gas my own car. I don't want to spell it on my shoes. I don't want to walk into a place going, oh, filled your car up lately, didn't you? You know, whatever. I mean, I used to work as a gas jockey back in high school days. That's gone. You know, we're slowly but surely shifting all these tasks over, and don't even get me started on the self-serve thing in the grocery store. Beep, 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 beep. Damn it, it's a can of soup. You know, it's like, well, you know, when we were just talking about how exciting Siri was trying to get here from the hotel, it turns me into a shopping center. And it's just like, and then it says, proceed to the route. What route, you little twit? You know, I'm in the middle of a shopping center. You know, apparently I'm supposed to drive through the Dollar Tree. You know, it's like, so, you know, I'm quite convinced that my toaster and Siri are conspiring, and are gonna kill me one of these days. But that's the big adjustment. How do we adjust to technology? How do we create new jobs? Where will the next wave of robotics occur? In Japan, it's hitting healthcare in ways that we would never expect. They're using robots in nursing homes, and the patients prefer the robots. Yeah, I mean, most people do. Because, yeah, I mean, it's when they ask the Japanese why you like the robot better than a person, it's an issue of shame. You soiled yourself. You're not in control. So here comes a person who's going to change your diaper, and you're 78 years old, and you're like, really? Really? I'm 78 years old, I used to be a teacher, I used to be this, and now I have to sit there and watch somebody change my diaper. Where when the robot goes up and says, I am changing your diaper, I don't care, you inferior human. You know, I mean, it's just like, you know, everything you do is disgusting. You know, so, as you've noticed, we don't poop. So, it just, it begins to change our dynamic. Yes?
Can you address the trade relationship between the United States and Canada?
Yep. It's fairly complicated, because what we often forget about Canada is that Canada is not an entirely united country. It's a confederacy. Every one of those provinces has remarkably intact systems in terms of what it does and how it trades, and, you know, for example, all the complaints about tar sand exploitation in Alberta, and it comes up in the Ontario in the national legislature every year, and people pass things about it's not good for the global climate, and Alberta goes, that's tough. Our oil, our sand, our province, we'll strip mine every square inch of this place if we want to. The softwood lumber issue. We've been concerned about softwood lumber coming in from Canada, competing with US producers. Really, that's all British Columbia. And when you talk to Canadians, they're kind of like, good luck with that, because we don't like the prices either. You know, all those tree huggers out in British Columbia have made it very expensive for us to deal with lumber, and most of us in Canada hate them because they're all a bunch of socialist weenies. You know, I mean, it's the New Democrats out in British Columbia and all the conservatives in Ontario and particularly Alberta. I mean, you talk to Saskatchewan, Manitoba, they're like, we hate those people. They're just not like us. And so our relations are always very complicated. We are probably going to see a little more attention paid to kind of the manufacturing exchange between the two. We do an awful lot of assembly work in Canada. We buy a lot of parts from Canada. Commodities are a big deal. As long as we're getting a lot of oil, gas from Alberta, we'll have a good relationship with them, regardless of what happens with Canada itself. We've always had a weird relationship with Quebec because they sell us a lot of power. And so the whole New England area is well aware that a lot of their power comes from the hydro facilities in Quebec. So it's going to be intriguing as we go forward. The two leaders of our country and theirs, not exactly on the same page. So Justin Trudeau is the first time they met, I mean, it was just kind of funny because they were supposed to be standing together at the lectern, and Trudeau was like this. And every time Trump would move over, Trudeau would move. And then pretty soon they're like a mile away from the microphone. And it's like, well then, get him to quit getting closer to me, you know? So it's just like, it's really fun to watch the dynamics of meetings. I remember the first time that Trump and Merkel met, because Merkel is not one to suffer, you know, much either. And the whole time he's talking, she's going, it's just like, you're not being very diplomatic either. She says, I'm German. It's just like, you know, diplomacy is what the French do. You know, we're not into that.
I think that's it. I would like to be.
I can go forever, honest.
No, but I think Dr. Kuehl would be willing to talk afterwards.
Sure.
Go on, but I just want to thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that, and thank you.